First, Bruce's daughter, then a fury of Desaad. Here's your look at Mcfarlane Toys, DC Multiverse, the Mcfarlane Collector's Edition, New 52, Huntress. A crossbow-wielding urban warrior and a core member of the Birds of Prey, the Huntress takes aim against crime in the dark heart of the city. Caught in a struggle between her rage and her role as a superhero, Huntress has come to represent the darker shades of gray in Gotham. Let's first get things underway by grabbing the tape measure and seeing how tall the new 52 Huntress stands, courtesy of the folks over at Mcfarlane Toys. Speaking of which, I'd like to thank Mcfarlane Toys for providing the sample we can have a look at here. The Huntress is going to stand at roughly 7 inches in height, or she's going to be roughly about 17.5 centimeters tall. Depending on which Huntress you follow, it could either be Helena Wayne or Helena Bertinelli. In the new 52, Helena Bertinelli would have already died and Wayne would have taken up the mantle. I assumed the figure was based on Wayne, but the card tells otherwise. That's why at the beginning I said that she was going to be turned into a Fury, courtesy of Desaad. If you're going with that logic, then she would have then been the daughter of Bruce Wayne and Catwoman, featured here by figures we got from the Nightfall line. She's a little bit taller than Nightfall Catwoman. She isn't, though, as tall as Bats. While we're also talking about Nightfall, let's also get the chance to bring in the Bane. Boy, that's a nice looking Bane. Here's also what she looks like with Batgirl. This was the Batgirl from the 3 Jokers line. And speaking of a Joker, here's what the figure looks like with the new Frontier Joker. Yeah, so a little bit of confusion when it comes to Huntress's card. The card itself, no confusing at all. That's some pretty cool looking artwork featured on the front. And if you have the light hitting it just right, it says Mcfarlane Collector Edition on the side. I was expecting it to read Helena Wayne, and while it still features Helena, it's Helena Bertinelli instead. Bertinelli, as far as I know, died long ago in the new 52. It's sort of a confusing thing with Huntress as well. 3 characters have picked up the name of Huntress over the years, and even then, with the Helena Wayne being no longer depicted as the future daughter of Batman and Catwoman, they sort of all kind of corrected everything with Post-Crisis on Infinite Earths. So again, like we have Helena Bertinelli, if again this is going to be new 52, I would have stuck with Wayne instead. The read-up is very small and easy to read, making mention more of the fact that she's a member of Bird of Prey. But nice looking card overall, whether it's confusing or not. Going to move that off to the side. The figure does also come included with a display stand. Display stand gets the polished treatment of now having a silver DC logo down below, but the shape of the stand and the placement of the peg is exactly the same. It's right over here, right where my thumb is tapping away. Let's move that off to the side. The figure of Huntress also does come include some swappable hands. Now, like right now, she does have some hands that have trigger firing fingers on the ends. If you want to have close fists instead, you got you covered. They have that as well. These hands can easily then be swapped out with the hands that she has. You just pop those hands off the forearms and swap them out instead. You want some dynamic hands instead? Todd's got you covered. You also get those as well. Now, if you want to change out the hands, it's simply just easy enough to talk about it. But let's get to doing some of that stuff. Just going to take the hands, we're going to remove them simply from the peg. I feel like they've really started to streamline these DC Multiverse figures. Let's go ahead and just, first of all, grab the right hand, plug that in place. There you go. Very easy to remove and change the hands out. The thing I really think it's cool, and I'm starting to see that now with a lot of the new DC Multiverse releases, instead of giving us swappable heads. Now, the thing about swappable heads, if I can get her to stand, it's fine and good to include them, but obviously you're going to have to then include additional packing material because now you're going to have large-sized heads. That's going to increase, of course, the cost of productions. Instead, what they've done is so much simpler. She has literally one head, and then she has multiple face plates. Again, I've seen this done a couple of times now with future DC Multiverse releases. Some of the Green Lanterns, for example, have had swappable faceplates. I don't know if necessarily Huntress is the first figure that's done this, but she does it really well. Before we get down to looking at removing her faces, that's kind of a bit of a gory idea, the figure does also come included with a crossbow. The crossbow I would have liked if they could have added just a little bit of paint. I mean, truth be told, it's only just molded here all in black plastic. But I suppose it does get the job done. Because we also only have now one trigger hand, let's go ahead and just put that in that hand. And it holds it okay. You could look at the handle and say that that's a pretty thick, large-sized weapon handle. But I think it does the job fine. Yeah, it would have been nice if they include just a little bit of paint to it. But overall, it's a nice-looking crossbow. And this whole time of just putting the figure back, hoping that she's going to balance. She does come included with, like I said, instead of full-size swappable heads, they did the next better thing, simpler thing, and more cost-effective thing. They had it with swappable faceplates instead. Little jarring, you probably may have noticed at the beginning of this review that the figure didn't have the face on her head. It actually came off in the packaging and it was rattling around. So even when I first got the box, I'm looking at that, I'm like, what's wrong with this figure's face? Then I realized that Huntress's face was floating around the bottom of the box. Very easy to swap out the heads. First of all, just before we do that though, let's just take the crossbow out of her hand and get a closer look at defaulted Huntress's head. It's a pretty likeness of Huntress, whether you go with Bertinelli or Wayne. I like the way they've sculpted, of course, the purple mask. It blends nicely enough to the hair. Now, there are a few little areas, like the front of the bangs, for example. You can see it's a little bit of a darker black than all the hair behind it. This is a trend that does continue when we look at this head sculpt, and you'll see what I mean in a second. But I'm not disappointed at all. I think the head sculpt is really nicely done on this one. Now, if you like this look, with sort of the Hawkeye ears on the side, she does come with also this alternate faceplate here. So odd for me to say faceplate and talk about Todd McFarlane's toys. You can see, though, that the faceplate, if I actually don't drop it on the floor. There we go. Just dropped it. If you look at the faceplate, there are very similar features between the two. I couldn't help but notice, though, that the skin tone is a little bit more redder on this one than on this one here. She does have now a face smile instead of actually just the defaulted face. Very similar, though. Changing out the heads is just super easy, though. Instead of having to yank the whole thing off the body, all you do is just take the front of the face and just peel it right off. This was probably the thing that was greeting you at the beginning of this review, and you're like, what is that monstrosity? I was kind of thinking the same thing. All it really is just a peg on the back of the face, and that just plugs into the hole. Super, super easy. You can't really do that with all figures. I'm sure there's some that probably wouldn't be able to pull that off. But really, when you look at something like this, the Huntress's outline, basically the part that you're peeling off of the face, just really outlines the contours of the mask. So it's easy to kind of get a more seamless look to the face. So you take the peg, you take the hole, and you line up the two. Simple shapes, guys, simple shapes. Plug that in place, and now you got a smiling expression of Huntress instead. This is where we left. This is where we've gone to. You can see the differences between the two. Still, again, like you'll see that the black isn't quite the same black for the rest of the hair, but it becomes more noticeable when you use this alternate head sculpt, which has the more streamer-lined looking mask. It really is only covering the front of her face as opposed to the parts that stick out the sides. When you go to change this faceplate off, just pop that off, replace it with this one. Seem to be all thumbs in this review. Pop that in place. You can probably see a little more of that here. It doesn't really align as well. Make sure, of course, I got that all the way on there. It doesn't align as well. You can see a lot more of the shinier black on the front and a little more of the matte black on the back. It's pretty close, but there's just enough of the difference that you can see. You can spot it. A little bit more of a darker black. I like this face sculpt, but I think if given the choice, I probably will end up going back to this one, of my favorite of the three. You want to do that right now? Okay, we'll leave it. We'll leave it. As for the rest of the body of Huntress here, a female body, but I'm trying to place exactly which female body this is. Now, I'm going to bring in a couple of figures. Now, bringing back in Catwoman, I was thinking that maybe they may have used some of Catwoman's bodies or some of Batgirl's bodies. But I think the only thing I can really look at and see that there might be some similar features is the top of the torso. The arms are different. The legs are also something that's very different between the two. So I'm sure they probably have retooled brand new body parts, like the legs, like the arms. Maybe the torso is the same as the one we got with Batgirl. It looks to be very similar. Obviously, one of the new included features is the fact that this figure does have a cloth cape. I was kind of on the fence before of what I felt when it came to cloth capes. I kind of like the idea of plastic capes myself, just more for the fact that all the original figures had them. But I'm really warming the idea up to the idea that they're now giving us cloth capes instead. There's a wire frame that runs here all the way down to the bottom of the point. This middle section doesn't have a wire frame. So the thing at least that's good about this is that down here it has a natural drape. With it only being on the sides, you can then obviously contour the cape for your liking. So if you want to have it look like it's being blown in the wind, you can do that. And you can straighten them out. It's a cape that doesn't occupy a whole lot of space and doesn't compete with the body. It's not like one of those overly large capes. Perhaps like when we looked at Cassandra Cain's Batgirl, for example. I thought the cape was a little too big. This is just the right size for Huntress. The colors are pretty close too. Like if you're looking at the stripe for the white, it's obviously brighter than the cross that we have on the front of her body, but it's close enough. You know, maybe they could have made that just a little bit brighter. She also does have a stripe down the side of her leg as well. I think the colors are pretty good on her. Things that clearly you can see, like the molded plastic for the hands, don't quite match the coloring of the painted purple that they use for the top of the gloves. it's about the only other thing that obviously some of the paint isn't going to quite 100% match, but I think the purple that they chose is a nice purple. She does have the high heels. So one of the problems though with high heeled figures, and this is also one of the problems with a Catwoman that we got from Nightfall, is she has a little less of a footprint space. Obviously, if you want to just have her standing on her own, that's probably why a couple of times when I had at the beginning of this review, you kind of have to find that sweet spot to get her balancing just right. It's almost like the figure does need a display stand. For the figure's articulation, going back to Huntress's head, the head's going to be on a ball joint. I was really expecting with the way that the hair was sculpted, there was going to be a lot more competingness to get the head to rotate all the way around. Yet, you can see that maybe they've done this deliberately. You can see that they've curved the hair up like this. And maybe they've done that so... Oh, I just dropped the face. I knew that was going to happen. Let's make sure we just plug the face all the way in here. I was thinking, though, like, with the hair sculpted like this, I wouldn't be able to rotate it all the way around. But with the way they've lifted it, just with a little bit of space like this, it seems to be just enough that you can rotate the head all the way around. Sometimes, though, it does pop off the face like it just did right now. The upper torso is going to be on a ball joint. The lower abdomen is also on a ball joint. And she does also have hinges in her arms. Now, I initially thought that the shoulder pads were going to be getting in the way, but you can actually see the shoulder pads are attached here and not here. So you can still bring the arms out at 90 degrees. Of course, you can move them forward and move them back. All the same things you'd expect to see with DC Multiverse figures, so a swivel in a bicep, double hinge on her elbow, and the hands rotate all the way around. Legs do split. The belts, the way they've designed them as well, I mean, the belt seems to be like a separate piece. Instead of having to retool all the lower end of her body as a brand new tool, instead all they really need to do was sculpt this piece and then just adhere to the lower half of her body so they can get the most mileage out of these molds. Legs do split out. The one thing about, though, Huntress is that she's contoured fairly well to the back of her body. However, though, if you take the legs and you move them forward, she does have sort of a bit of a disjointedness, and you can probably see it a lot more when you look at it from the front. I'm sure no person is probably going to display the figure like this. Maybe you are, maybe you aren't, I don't know. But if you move the figure's legs out even, especially, you can see it develops a bit of a bulge underneath. Just because, again, like they wanted to make this contoured as well as they could. But when you move the legs out sometimes, like even I had her at the beginning of this review, sort of with her legs bent like this, it does add for a little bit more awkwardness at the tops of her thighs. Just really no way around that, I guess. She has hinges, though, at the tops of her thighs that allows the legs to split about that far. Of course, you can move them forward, and you can move them back. There's a mild swivel at the top of the thigh. Double hinge on the knee. No articulation here for the boots, but there is at least ankle articulation. You can move it up and down this way. You can also rock it back and forth as well. And the figure does have, surprised, why? I don't even know why the figure necessarily needs toe articulation. For what little of a toe she actually does get, I don't think it really necessarily needed it. But that's part of the marketing sell. Like all these figures have toe articulation, whether she has such a small full footprint or not. Huntress does get that as well. The really neat thing about this Huntress is the fact that, yeah, again, instead of, from a cost savings standpoint, it's so much easier and more cost savings for Todd and his team to simply just sculpt 3 faceplates rather than having 3 full-sized heads. As a collector, it makes things a whole lot easier as well because you're not having to yank the head off. Providing, of course, the hair is going to not change between the 2 face expressions, then you can easily get away with the idea that the figure could use the same head and just simply change out the faces. Periodically, though, as you probably saw in this review, you may inadvertently pop off the faceplate. It just comes with the territory. But I like the idea that they're doing this, and they seem to be doing a lot more with some of their recent releases. Kind of ironic that 3 different characters have picked up the mantle of the Huntress, and yet with this release of Mcfarlane Toys, the Huntress comes included with 3 swappable faceplates. It's one of 2 really good ideas that went into this character. Instead of having to produce the cost of 3 separate head sculpts, we know that that's going to be more expensive for the company to produce. If they can get away with it and they have the same hairstyle really for all the 3 characters, having swappable faceplates, it's one of those ideas that you look at it and you think, well, why wouldn't any other company have done that sooner? It just seems to make more sense. Granted, with that, though, you have a single peg on the back of the faceplate and then you have a single hole. It's simple shapes. Periodically, though, you may notice that the faceplate pops off. How many times did it pop off in this review? Twice? I mean, it's a simple fix. You just pop it back in place. That's one of 2 good ideas that went into the release of Huntress here, the other one being the fabric cape. For a while, I liked the idea of plastic capes, but I'm really warming up to the idea that fabric capes seem to be the norm now. I don't think you need to have a wire built onto the bottom of the cape. I feel that really gives the cape more of just a rigid stubbornness. The wire only on the sides works the best because then you got the natural drape in between. Huntress's cape is small enough too that it doesn't look like it's just enveloping her. It's a really cool looking figure. Some of the colors though, like the purple, like in her arms, you can see that there's clearly areas that are purple painted and then molded in purple plastic. It's close enough. Obviously also as well, the front of her bangs is a darker black than the rest of her hair, but it's close enough to being seamless. All in all though, I really like the look of this one, even though, funny though enough, I'm displaying her in final looks with my least favorite of the heads. I think after this review, I'm going to pop the head off easily and swap it out instead with the one that has the smiling expression as being my favorite of the three. What do you guys think of this version of Huntress? Let me know down below in the comment section whether you've had the chance to pick this one up or not, or if this is one that now you could see yourselves picking up thanks to this review. Speaking of thanking, I'd like to thank the folks over at Mcfarlane Toys that did provide the sample of the brand new 52 Huntress that we had the chance to have a look in this review. If you guys did enjoy this video, do it a solid now. Why don't you throw it a like? You guys want to stick around for more so? I hope so. Even though we are wrapping up things right now for the Huntress, there are going to be more DC Multiverse reviews in the pipeline, so making sure you're coming back on a regular basis. As always, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.